She was a prisoner for an hour. The prison still smolders. The survey vessel KSS Dodam was a small, ugly ship. It had no weapons. It had no armor worth speaking of. It was the kind of ship that other species looked at and assumed belonged to a dying civilization. Patched hull plating, manual navigation inputs, and a cargo bay that smelled faintly of instant noodles and machine oil. The Vreth cruiser that dropped out of faster-than-light travel beside it did so with all the slow, deliberate weight of something that had never once been afraid of anything. The Undying Law was enormous. It was black, angular, and covered in the kind of design details that existed purely to make other ships feel small. Vreth engineering philosophy was built on intimidation. Every line of the ship said the same thing. You are already beaten, you just haven't admitted it yet. The hailing signal they sent to the KSS Dodam was not a greeting. It was a demand. Surrender the vessel. Prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. Inside the Dodam, a woman named Yuna looked at the hailing screen for about 3 seconds. Then she saved her geological survey data to an encrypted backup drive, tucked it into her boot, and went back to eating her ration pack. She chewed slowly. Outside the viewport, the Undying Law filled the entire frame of her window. She noted, with the detached curiosity of someone cataloging rock samples, that the ship's outer hull had stress fractures along the third ventral panel. Old damage, probably from a previous engagement, never properly repaired. She filed that detail somewhere in the back of her mind, and kept eating. The Vreth boarding team came through the airlock in under 4 minutes. There were 6 of them. They stood between 2 and 2.5 meters tall, with armored exoskeletal plating the color of deep rust, and 4 arms each, the upper 2 for combat, the lower 2 for equipment. Their helmet visors glowed a pale, hostile orange. They swept into the ship with practiced efficiency, clearing room by room with the quiet coordination of a team that had done this hundreds of times. They found Yuna in the galley. She was sitting at the small folding table bolted to the wall. She had her ration pack open. There was a cup of instant coffee steaming beside her right hand. She looked up at 6 heavily armed alien soldiers filling her doorway, and her expression did not change in any meaningful way. She looked the way a person looks when a meeting runs slightly longer than expected, mildly aware of the inconvenience, not particularly alarmed. The lead Vreth soldier ran a quick biological scan. The results came back almost immediately. Human female, age 31, species classification. Terran, class 2 primitive. Low threat index. No implanted weapons. No combat augmentation. Physically frail by interstellar standards. Life signs stable and inexplicably calm. The soldier stared at the scan results for a moment longer than necessary. Yuna drank her coffee. They bound her in 7 layers of energy restraints, standard procedure for any biological capture, regardless of threat class. The restraints were designed for species that could punch through hull plating, tear apart shielding, or survive vacuum exposure. They were complete overkill for a human geologist. The Vreth did it anyway, because procedure was procedure, and because something about the way she was sitting made the lead soldier feel, for the first time in a long career, vaguely uncomfortable. They walked her through the docking bridge and into the Undying Law. Not frantically, not obviously. She moved her eyes the way someone does when they are reading a room they plan to be in for a while. She noted the floor material. Hard composite, slightly uneven near the joints. Old ship, settled structure. She noted the ventilation grates along the upper corridor walls, the spacing between them, the faint directional hum of recycled air moving left to right. She noted that the guards rotated positions at every corridor junction, that the one walking behind her had a slightly longer step with his left lower limb. Old injury, compensated gait. She filed all of it away. The cell they put her in was on Deck 7, deep in the ship's interior. It was small. The walls were a dull gray-green material, dense and smooth. The floor had a faint chemical smell, industrial sealant probably applied recently. A single light panel sat in the ceiling behind a protective grate. There was no bed, no furniture, just the floor and the walls and the light. In the corner of the cell, sitting with his thin legs pulled to his narrow chest, was another prisoner. He was small, insectoid, with large, dark eyes, and a pale, papery exoskeleton that had the look of something that had been under stress for too long. He watched Yuna walk in with the expression of someone who had stopped expecting anything good to happen. His name was Rico. He had been on the Undying Law for 11 days. He watched the energy restraints on the human dissolve as the cell door sealed behind her. Standard deactivation, once inside containment. He watched her stand in the center of the cell for a moment, completely still. Then she rolled her neck. Then she crouched and pressed 2 fingers against the floor near the wall joint, and pressed down slowly, like she was testing the firmness of soil at a dig site. Rico stared at her. "You are not afraid," he said, through his translator node. His voice came out thin and clicking, the translator smoothing it into something recognizable. Yuna looked at him. "I'm a little annoyed," she said. "I was in the middle of a survey run, 17 days of prep work." Rico blinked his large dark eyes. "No one escapes from this ship," he said. He said it gently, the way someone says something they have already made their peace with. "I have been here 11 days. I have watched them bring in 14 other prisoners. Not one of them has left. The Undying Law is the Vreth Dominion's most secure vessel. The commander is Doran. He has never lost a prisoner." Yuna nodded slowly. She was looking at the floor again. Then the walls. Then the ventilation grate near the ceiling. "What's the air recycling system like on this ship?" she asked. Rico opened his mouth, closed it. I do not know. I have never thought about it." "Centralized or sectioned?" "I don't. The hum changes pitch when the guards open the corridor door," she said, half to herself. "Section system. Deck-by-deck pressure zones." She sat down cross-legged in the center of the cell. "That's useful." Rico looked at the sealed door, looked back at her. "Useful for what?" he asked quietly. Yuna pulled out the second half of her ration pack from her jacket pocket. She had put it there before the boarding team arrived, a small automatic habit, and opened it. "Give me about an hour," she said. She started eating. Rico sat in the corner of the cell and watched the human eat her food in the most terrifyingly relaxed way he had ever seen any creature do anything. And for reasons he could not fully explain, for the first time in 11 days, he felt something he had entirely forgotten. He felt like things might be about to change. She was a prisoner for an hour. The prison still smolders. Commander Doran had a wall in his command quarters dedicated entirely to records. Not digital files, physical records, printed and framed, the way Vreth officers of his generation preferred. Certificates of capture, species catalogs, incident reports marked resolved in thick red ink. There were 431 of them. Each one represented a ship boarded, a crew detained, a species added to the Vreth Dominion's ever-growing catalog of the subdued and the processed. He had never lost a prisoner. He stood in front of that wall now, holding a thin data slate with the new intake report on it. And he felt what he always felt when a new capture came through, mild satisfaction, the same quiet pleasure a collector feels when a new piece arrives and is placed on the shelf without incident. He read the human's file with modest curiosity. Species, Terran. Common name, human. Origin world, Earth, Sol system. Planetary classification, Class 4 hostile environment, atmospheric volatility, high radiation surface zones, extreme temperature variance, megafauna predation risk, geological instability. He paused on that last part. Class 4 hostile. That was an unusually high environmental rating for a world that had produced something classified as a Class 2 primitive. Most species that evolved on Class 4 worlds came out as something dangerous. The Terrans were apparently an exception. Biologically soft, technologically modest, and, according to the boarding team's field report, completely calm during capture. He noted that detail the way a man notes a smudge on an otherwise clean surface, briefly, without real concern, and moved on. Processing was scheduled for the following cycle. He had 63 prisoners in the lower decks, awaiting review. The human would wait her turn. He put the data slate down and turned his attention to more pressing matters. He would not think about the human again for several hours. By then, of course, it would be far too late. Down on Deck 7, Yuna had been in the cell for exactly 22 minutes. She had spent the first 20 of those minutes doing nothing visible. She sat in the center of the floor, eyes slightly unfocused, and she listened. Not casually, she listened the way she listened when she was underground on a survey, in a cave system or a deep drill shaft, where the sounds around you are the only map you have. She listened to the ship breathe. The ventilation cycled every 4 minutes and 18 seconds on their deck. She counted 3 full cycles to confirm. The pressure dropped very slightly. She felt it in her ears every time the corridor door at the end of Deck 7 opened, which happened at irregular intervals, but averaged out to once every 9 minutes. Guards, she had decided, moved in pairs. The footsteps that reached her through the floor were always 2 sets, never 1, never 3. The light panel in the ceiling flickered for exactly 1/3 of a second every time something large powered on or off somewhere else in the ship. A weapon system cycling, an engine adjustment, a major door seal engaging. She had caught 4 flickers in 20 minutes. 2 were rhythmic, probably routine engine cycling. 1 was longer, a weapon system coming online and then standing down, probably a drill or a test. The 4th had been a single sharp flicker with no follow-up. She wasn't sure what that was yet. At the 20-minute mark, she stood up and began moving around the cell walls. She pressed her palm flat against each section of the wall and pushed. Not hard enough to look like she was trying to break it. She just pressed and held and felt. The walls were a compressed composite material, probably 3 to 4 centimeters thick. Dense. Not impossible, just difficult. The joins between wall panels, however, were a different matter. The join between the back wall and the left side wall had a faint give to it. Not much, barely perceptible, but it was there. The composite had been installed under temperature stress, probably during a rapid refit. It had contracted slightly and never rebonded fully. She pressed the join with 2 fingers and felt it flex. Rico had been watching her in complete silence. He was very good at being still. It was a survival instinct from his species' evolutionary past, where movement attracted predators. But watching this human move slowly and methodically around the cell walls in silence was doing something strange to his nerves. He couldn't tell if she was planning something, or if this was simply how humans processed fear. "What are you doing?" he asked finally, keeping his voice low. "Looking," she said. "For what?" "Weak points." She crouched near the base of the back wall and sniffed once, close to the floor. Then she crouched lower and looked at the floor sealant, the gray compound that sealed the floor plates to the wall base. "What does this smell like to you?" she asked. Rico leaned forward cautiously and sniffed. "Chemical. Mineral. I don't know what kind." "Corrosive mineral base," Yuna said. "They used it as a stabilizer in the sealant. It's cheap, and it works well as a bonding agent." She straightened up. "It also reacts badly with long-chain polymer compounds when it's exposed to sustained pressure and a small amount of friction heat." Rico stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I'm a geologist." She looked down at her boots. Standard-issue survey boots, thick polymer soles, rated for volcanic terrain, chemical splash, and moderate acid exposure. She pressed the sole of one boot against the floor sealant near the wall base and began applying slow, steady pressure, rocking the sole back and forth with just enough friction to generate a small amount of heat. "That will take too long," Rico said, but his voice had changed. Some of the flatness had left it. "The guards come every 9 minutes average," she said. "Currently 6 minutes and 40 seconds since the last pass." She kept the pressure even, kept the movement small and quiet. "I have time." Rico watched a faint discoloration begin to spread from the point of contact between her boot and the sealant. The compound was softening. The wall join above it was already flexed. The chemistry was slow, but it was working, and he was watching it work. And his brain was doing something it had not done in 11 days. It was running forward instead of backward. "You planned this before they even brought you in," he said. "I planned this while they were walking me down the corridor," she said. Rico was quiet for a moment. "You were observing the ship." "I was reading the ship," she corrected, gently. "There is a difference. Observing is passive. Reading means you're looking for specific information." "What information were you looking for?" She pressed the boot sole a little harder. The discoloration widened. The sealant was beginning to flake at the edge. "How to leave," she said. She was a prisoner for an hour. The prison still smolders. The lights on Deck 7 went dark at exactly 63 minutes after Yuna had been placed in the cell. It was not a dramatic darkness. The light panel did not shatter. There was no explosion, no alarm, no sudden bang of something breaking. The lights simply went out, steadily and completely, as if someone had made a calm and deliberate decision to turn it off, which, in a manner of speaking, was exactly what had happened. What Yuna had done in the 31 minutes between identifying the weak wall join and the lights going out was this. She had used the boot sole reaction to soften a section of floor sealant approximately 40 centimeters long at the base of the back wall join. The sealant, once destabilized, released a small amount of mineral gas, odorless to most species, but she had been expecting it and breathed shallow. The gas, in a sealed cell with poor ventilation cycling, accumulated near the floor. When she applied a second, longer friction pass with the boot sole against the now bare composite beneath the sealant, the heat and the gas interaction was enough to create a slow, flameless oxidation reaction inside the wall joint material itself. Not fire, not explosion, just a quiet, steady chemical degradation of a wall joint that had already been structurally compromised from the day it was installed. The joint opened, not wide, barely 8 centimeters at the base, tapering to 3 at the top. But the composite panel flexed outward at the bottom, and behind it was the service corridor that ran behind the cell block. And inside the service corridor was the wiring conduit for the deck lighting system. She had pulled one wire. Just one. The lights went out. "Stay close." She went through the gap in the wall feet first, pulling the panel out just enough to slide through, then reached back and guided Rico through after her. He was smaller than her, and made it easily. She pressed the panel back into place behind them. It wouldn't hold up to inspection, but it didn't need to. She needed 45 seconds. The service corridor was dark, except for the faint blue glow of passive indicator lights on the conduit panels. It was enough. She moved forward at a pace that was unhurried but deliberate, one hand lightly trailing the wall. Rico followed, pressing close to her back. "Where are we going?" he whispered. "Corridor junction ahead," she said quietly. "2 guards, currently standing there. They'll be looking toward the cell block because the lights just went out. They'll be expecting a malfunction or a fight. They won't be expecting something to come up behind them from the service corridor." "There are 2 of them," Rico said. "They are Vreth combat soldiers." "I know. You are a geologist." "Yes, I know that too." She stopped at a maintenance hatch and listened through it for 3 seconds. Then she pushed it open a few centimeters and looked through. The two guards were exactly where she had expected them, facing toward the cell block, one with his hand on his communication device, about to report the light failure. Their lower two arms were at their sides. Their upper combat arms were raised but unfocused, pointing at nothing specific. She came out of the hatch low and fast. The first thing to understand about Vreth physiology, which Yuna had read about in a xenobiology briefing paper approximately 2 years prior, and had retained the way she retained all practical information, cleanly and permanently, was that their nervous system had a cluster of pressure-sensitive nodes along the join between their upper and lower torso sections. These nodes were analogous to a human solar plexus, a concentrated, unprotected nerve junction that, when struck correctly, caused a full system disruption. Not fatal, not even seriously harmful, just a complete, temporary shutdown of voluntary muscle control, lasting approximately 12 to 18 seconds. The Vreth did not know this about themselves. Or rather, they knew the nodes existed, but they had never had cause to consider them a vulnerability, because no species they had ever fought had been small enough, fast enough, and informed enough to reach them in a direct engagement. Yuna was 1.6 meters tall. She weighed 61 kilograms. She had spent 4 years doing geological survey work on worlds where hostile terrain was a significant understatement, which meant she was in the kind of functional physical condition that didn't look like much until it suddenly mattered enormously. She hit the first guard's torso node with the heel of her palm, angled upward, with her full body weight behind it. He went down without a sound. The second guard turned. She was already moving. She got under his upper arms before he could bring them down, stepped into his body, and drove 2 fingers into the second node on his left side, with precise, clinical force. His legs simply stopped working. He stared at her with his visor from the ground, completely unable to move, and she looked back at him briefly. 12 seconds, she said, to no one in particular. Maybe 15. She took his access card from his lower armband, took his communication device and turned it off, and moved. Rico was standing in the service corridor hatchway, pressed flat against the wall, completely frozen. He watched the 2 guards on the floor, both alive, both breathing, both entirely unable to move, and then watched Yuna wave him forward, like she was calling him across a street. He followed. He did not know what else to do. They moved through 2 more corridors at a steady pace. She stopped once, pressed her ear against a sealed door, listened for 4 seconds, and changed direction. She led them to the weapons bay on the mid-level of Deck 6. Not because she wanted weapons, but because the weapons bay had direct access to the ship's environmental control conduit. And the environmental control conduit ran straight to the engine corridor. Inside the weapons bay, while Rico watched the door, she found the coolant flow regulator panel and opened it with the stolen access card. She did not destroy it. She adjusted it, a careful, specific reduction in coolant output to the engine corridor that would drop the temperature in that section of the ship over the following 8 minutes, slow and steady, below the thermal threshold for Vreth biology. Vreth went into a protective metabolic slowdown when their core temperature dropped below a certain point. Another detail from the same xenobiology briefing paper, filed away 2 years ago under potentially useful, reason unknown. Now the reason was very clear. The drop would sweep forward from the engine section through the ship's connected corridors over the next 20 minutes. Most of the crew would be sitting down before they understood what was happening. Their bodies would do what Vreth bodies did, slow everything down, conserve heat, enter a state that looked almost like sleep. She did not touch the prisoner cells. The environmental adjustment was localized to crew zones only. She walked Rico to the command deck. Commander Doran was sitting at his console when the door opened. He was already feeling the cold, a deep, unnatural chill that had crept up on him slowly, and that his body was beginning to respond to with heavy, pulling tiredness. He turned to see who had entered, and he found a small human woman standing in the doorway to his own command deck, holding his crew's access card, with a frail insectoid alien standing a half-step behind her. She crossed to his console, sat down in the secondary operator's chair, and began working the beacon system. 61 prisoners in your lower decks, she said. She did not look at him while she worked. I've sent a rescue beacon to Human Union frequency. Response vessel will be here in under 2 hours. She paused. I'm also copying the prisoner manifest to the Union diplomatic channel, for records. Doran opened his mouth. His voice came out slower than he intended. What, he said, are you? Yuna looked at him then. Her expression was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was the same expression she had worn in the galley when the boarding team first arrived. Calm, practical, mildly inconvenienced. I'm a geologist, she said. I was in the middle of a survey run. She turned back to the console and kept working. Doran sat in his chair and felt the cold settling into his joints and thought about the number on his wall, 431, and understood, with the slow clarity of a mind already beginning to go quiet, that the number was about to become meaningless. She was a prisoner for an hour. The prison still smolders. The KSS Harang dropped out of FTL travel 1 hour and 54 minutes after the beacon signal reached the Union relay station. It was a mid-class response frigate, not a warship, not a heavy cruiser, just a solid, well-maintained vessel that did the kind of work that didn't get written about much. Search and rescue, diplomatic extractions, prisoner recoveries, the kind of work that required patience and a good medical kit more than firepower. Its crew of 22 was experienced, professional, and very tired, because this was their third call-out in 11 days. The man in command of the Harang was named Tejo. He was 44 years old. He had a lean face, close-cropped gray at his temples, and the particular quality of stillness that develops in people who have spent a long time dealing with difficult situations in small spaces. He did not say much when he didn't need to. And he had a habit, when reading a situation report, of going very quiet and reading it twice. He read the beacon data once. Then he read it again. Then he looked at his navigation officer and said, "Is the target vessel showing any weapon signatures?" "No, sir. Environmental systems are at reduced capacity. Crew biosigns are present but suppressed. Looks like a metabolic slowdown across most of the ship. Prisoner deck biosigns are normal." Tejo was quiet for a moment. "What caused the metabolic suppression?" "Best reading I can get is a coolant drop in the crew sections. Localized. The prisoner sections weren't touched." Tejo nodded very slowly. He had done 31 extractions in his career. He had never arrived at a scene where someone had already done most of the work. He thought about who had sent the beacon, and pulled up the KSS Dodom's last crew manifest on his console screen. One crew member, Yuna, survey geologist, 3 years field experience, primarily volcanic and deep geological survey. No combat training listed. No military designation. He closed the manifest and stood up. "Doc with the undying law," he said. "Medical team on standby. Let's go see what's left." What was left was, by any measure, quite a lot. They boarded through the main docking port on Deck 4, which opened without resistance. Yuna had unlocked it from the command console 20 minutes before their arrival. The corridors were quiet. Vreth crew members were sitting or lying against walls throughout the ship, awake but slow, wrapped in whatever insulating material they had managed to pull around themselves. None of them were aggressive. They were cold, and they were tired, and they were deeply, profoundly confused. Tejo walked through the ship with a medkit in one hand, and a universal translator in the other. His medical crew fanned out behind him, moving efficiently. His security team swept each corridor section, verified the crew were not a threat, and moved on. No one fired anything. No one had to. The prisoner cells on the lower decks had been opened from the command console. 61 prisoners, 17 different species, were standing or sitting in the corridor outside their cells when Teho's crew arrived. Some were in poor condition, malnourished, dehydrated, showing signs of extended confinement. All of them were alive. A medic named Bori went down the line with a scanner and a calm voice, doing triage without hurry. Rico was near the front of the group. He was standing very straight, which Teho would later learn was the insectoid equivalent of being in a state of overwhelming emotional agitation. When Teho reached him, Rico looked at him with his large dark eyes and said through the translator, "Is she one of yours?" "Who?" Teho said. "The human, the small one." "I imagine so," Teho said. "Where is she?" Rico pointed upward. "Command deck. She has been there for an hour. She said to wait here." Teho took the stairs to the command deck. He found Yuna sitting at the secondary console. She had a small notepad on her knee, actual paper, which he found briefly remarkable, and she was writing something on it in small, neat characters. Commander Doran was seated against the far wall, wrists bound in his own restraints, awake, and looking at the floor with the fixed, hollow expression of a man reviewing his life choices. Two of his senior officers were beside him in the same condition, equally restrained, equally hollow-eyed. Yuna looked up when Teho came in. "You made good time," she said. "We were already in the sector," he said. He looked around the command deck, looked at the restrained commander, looked back at her. "The full crew is suppressed?" "They'll be back to normal in a few hours once the coolant system restores. I've already started the reset. It's on a timer. I didn't want them coming around before your security team had done a full sweep." She tore the top sheet off the notepad and held it out to him. "Prisoner list. I pulled it from their intake system. 17 species, 61 individuals, all accounted for. I've noted 3 who need immediate medical attention. They've been here the longest." Then he looked at her. "The boarding team report said you were eating when they took you," he said. "I was," she said. "I was hungry." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you all right?" She seemed to consider the question genuinely. "I lost a day and a half of survey data," she said. "The backup drive is in my boot, so that's fine. I'm slightly tired. Other than that, yes." Teho looked at Commander Doran. The commander was watching the exchange with the glazed attention of someone trying to understand a language they had never heard before. His translator node was still active. He was hearing every word. "What is she?" Doran said. It wasn't really a question anymore. It was more like a statement that had lost its way. Teho looked at him, then back at Yuna. Something in his expression was very carefully neutral. "She's a geologist," he said. Doran stared at him. "Survey geologist," Teho added, as if the clarification helped. It did not appear to help. They walked the prisoners out in groups over the following hour. Bori's medical team worked through the list Yuna had made, prioritizing the 3 critical cases, stabilizing 2 of them on site, and moving 1 directly to the Harong's medical bay. The 17 species were sorted, scanned, documented, and given food, water, and blankets with the quiet efficiency of a crew that had done this before and understood that speed and calm mattered more than anything else. The Vreth crew was left aboard their own ship, unharmed. The Undying Law was not seized. The Harong wasn't a warship and had no mandate for that. Doran and his 2 officers were released from their restraints before the Harong departed, which was, Teho would later note in his own report, more courtesy than the Undying Law had extended to any of its 61 previous prisoners. The Harong filed a full incident report to the Union diplomatic channel before it left the sector. Attached to the report was the complete prisoner intake manifest from the Undying Law's own system. Names, species, capture dates, homeworlds, stated reasons for detention. Most of the stated reasons were thin. Several were blank entirely. The Union Diplomatic Office sent a formal notice to the Vreth Dominion within 24 hours. The notice was 3 sentences long. The first sentence acknowledged the incident. The second requested the immediate cessation of unauthorized detention of Union-registered vessels and personnel. The third sentence was a list, clean, numbered, formatted, of every species the Undying Law had detained without a corresponding diplomatic incident report, going back 4 years. The list was 62 entries long. The Vreth Dominion did not respond to the notice for 6 days. When they did, their response was a formal complaint. The Undying Law had been boarded and its crew incapacitated by a Union agent. They used the word agent with deliberate weight, because agent implied intent, training, authorization. It implied something organized and purposeful that could be protested and condemned. The Union's reply was a single attached document. It was UNA's incident report, filed through standard survey crew channels. The Vreth Dominion read the incident report. Then, their diplomatic team asked, through an intermediary channel, for clarification on one specific point. The Union office clarified. Yes, she was a geologist. Yes, that was her actual job. No, there was no secondary designation. The Vreth diplomatic team went quiet for a while after that. She was a prisoner for an hour. The prison still smolders. 3 months after the incident on the Undying Law, the Vreth Dominion quietly removed the ship from active service. They did not announce it. There was no formal decommissioning ceremony, no statement to the press channels, no diplomatic notice filed. The Undying Law was simply moved to a salvage holding yard on the outer edge of Vreth-controlled space and left there. The official internal record listed the reason as scheduled maintenance review. No maintenance review was ever scheduled. The ship sat in the yard, dark and cold, surrounded by other derelict vessels that had earned their retirement through age or damage. The Undying Law had not been damaged. Its systems were fully functional. Its hull was intact. It could have been returned to active service the following week with minimal effort. No one really wanted to go back inside it. Along the inner walls of Deck 7, faint scorch marks still ran along the base of the back wall of what had been Cell 4. The marks were narrow and low, tracing the exact line where a floor sealant compound had been systematically degraded by polymer friction over the course of about 30 minutes. The composite panel beside it had a warped edge at the base, bent outward and then pressed back, not quite sitting flush. A maintenance technician had looked at it once, noted it in a work log, and then looked at it for a long time without writing anything else. No one cleaned the marks. No one repaired the panel. The salvage yard workers who occasionally walked the ship for inventory checks tended to skip Deck 7 entirely after the first visit. It was just that standing in that corridor, looking at those marks, produced an uncomfortable feeling that was difficult to name. It felt less like looking at damage and more like reading a message. On the insectoid homeworld of Wreath, a small pale creature named Rico had become, entirely against his nature and preferences, something of a public figure. He had not intended this. He was a quiet individual who had worked as a trade logistics coordinator for 11 years before the Undying Law incident. He liked order, documentation, and predictable outcomes. He did not like attention, public speaking, or situations that could not be planned in advance. He was, by any measure, one of the least likely beings in the galaxy to become a storyteller. And yet, the story came out of him in pieces, first to his family, then to a journalist who had heard a fragment of it through the diplomatic incident records, then to a wider audience that grew with each retelling because the story was, in a fundamental way, unlike most stories. It did not have a warrior in it. It did not have a dramatic battle or a last-minute rescue or a hero who had trained for years for exactly this moment. It had a geologist who had been mildly inconvenienced and had responded the way, Rico always said, She seemed to respond to most problems by paying careful attention and using what was already there. People always wanted to know about the escape. They wanted the part where she went through the wall, the part where she put 2 VREF soldiers on the floor without a weapon. That was the exciting part, they said. But he always made sure to tell a different part first, the part people didn't ask about. He always told them about the first 20 minutes. She sat in the center of the cell, he would say, and she did nothing. She just listened. She didn't pace. She didn't test the walls. She didn't try anything at all. She sat, and her eyes went slightly unfocused, and she listened to the ship for 20 minutes. And then she got up, and she knew exactly what to do. He would pause here, because this was the part that had stayed with him the longest. I asked her once, on the harangue, while the medic was looking at my arms, I asked her, "When did you decide you were going to escape?" And she looked at me like the question was slightly strange. And she said, "When they put me in the cell." And I said, "But you didn't do anything for 20 minutes. And she said, "I was doing the most important part." Rico would let that sit with his audience for a moment. "That is the thing about humans," he would say, "that no one tells you. It is not that they are strong, though some of them are. It is not that they are fearless, because she told me later that she was somewhat afraid. She just considered it irrelevant information. It is that they are patient in a very specific way. They are patient in the direction of action. Every quiet moment is preparation. Every observation is a tool they are picking up and putting in their pocket. They are loading." His audiences, across 17 species and dozens of retelling occasions, always went quite still at that part. The VREF Dominion revised the human species threat classification 4 times in the 3 months following the incident. The first revision moved humans from Class 2 primitive to Class 3 moderate. This was done 2 days after the incident report was filed, based on the demonstrated ability to neutralize trained combat personnel. The second revision, 2 weeks later, moved them to Class 4 after someone in the VREF Intelligence Division actually read the full xenobiology file on Earth and realized that the planetary classification had been sitting at Hostile Environment Class 4 the entire time, and no one had connected the 2 data points. The third revision, a month after that, created an entirely new classification category. Not a number, a flag. A yellow marker that sat beside the human species entry in the VREF contact database and meant, in direct translation, pending further study. This category had never existed before. It had been created specifically because no existing category felt accurate. The fourth revision, 6 weeks after the third, simply added a note to the human entry in plain language, below all the classification flags and biological data and contact history. The note had been written by a senior VREF intelligence analyst who had spent 3 weeks reviewing the Undying Law incident in detail, and had decided that the most useful thing she could add to the file was honest. The note said, "Do not assume that biological fragility indicates limited capability. Do not assume that calm behavior indicates absence of planning. Do not detail without a thorough review of species environmental origin data. Cross-reference planetary classification before any contact assessment." Below that, in smaller text, the analyst had added one final line. It was not an official entry. It had been included anyway, and no one above her had removed it, possibly because they agreed with it. It said, "The subject was a geologist on a routine survey. Adjust expectations accordingly." Una filed her final survey report on the Kale Nebula mineral distribution study 6 weeks after returning from the Undying Law incident. It was a thorough, well-documented 48-page report on subsurface mineral composition across 7 survey sites, with detailed spectral analysis, density mapping, and 3 recommendations for follow-up study. It was considered, by her department, an excellent piece of work. In the incident report she had filed through standard channels immediately after the event, the summary section read, "Detained by hostile foreign vessel during active survey operation. Situation resolved without escalation. Return to survey duties. Minimal property damage to the KSS Dodam. None. Minimal physical harm to crew. None." The remarks section, which most survey crew left blank, contained 2 lines. The first said, "Recommend the Union update xenobiological briefing access for survey crews. Existing files are useful and underused." The second said, "Recommend the Vreth Dominion improve their cell construction standards. The wall join on Deck 7, Cell 4 had been structurally compromised for what appeared to be several years." A basic maintenance review would have caught it. The incident report was read by 11 people in the Union administrative chain. 7 of them forwarded it to someone else. 3 of them printed it out and kept a physical copy. 1 of them pinned it to a board in the break room of the Union Survey Operations Office on Station Nero, where it remained for the next 2 years, slightly yellowed at the corners, next to a coffer stain that no one had ever bothered to clean. The undying law sat in the salvage yard. The scorch marks on Deck 7 sat on the wall. The wall panel sat slightly out of flush, pressed back but never quite right, like a door that had been opened and could not fully pretend it hadn't been. Some marks, once made, do not come out. Some doors, once opened, do not close. And some geologists, on some unremarkable survey runs, remind the galaxy, quietly, practically, without any particular fuss, exactly what kind of world it was that made them.